Elizabeth. I fastened a ring onto her finger and closed her hand around it. No one at court noticed anything unusual. The ring looked simple from the outside, just another piece of royal jewelry, but inside it hid two tiny painted portraits facing each other. One showed a young queen wearing a French hood from the 1530s, and the other showed a small girl. Mother and daughter stared across centuries of silence. Elizabeth wore that ring for most of her life, keeping it hidden from the court that watched her every move. Publicly, she almost never spoke her mother's name. Privately, she carried her mother with her every day. That silence was survival. The woman in that tiny portrait had once been crowned Queen of England, only to be executed for treason by Elizabeth's own father. Long before she ruled England, Elizabeth was a child living inside one of the most dangerous families in Europe. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, did not begin life expecting to become queen. Anne grew up inside a family that understood how dangerous power could be. Her father, Thomas Boleyn, moved carefully through the royal court, knowing success depended on pleasing the crown and avoiding enemies. Anne spent part of her youth living at European courts, including France, where she learned languages, fashion, and politics. The French court valued conversation and wit, and Anne thrived in that world. When she returned to England, she already knew how the game worked. Influence and alliances mattered. She entered the court of King Henry VIII, confident and clever, and her quick mind stood out immediately. Henry noticed her. At that time, Henry was married to Catherine of Aragon. Catherine had endured 6 pregnancies, but only one child survived, a daughter named Mary. The need for a male heir haunted the king. His father had gained the throne after years of civil war known as the Wars of the Roses, and the Tudor dynasty still felt fragile. Without a clear male successor, the country could face another struggle for power. Henry searched for a solution. When he began to pursue Anne, she did something unusual. Other women had accepted the role of mistress quietly, as it could bring wealth or protection. Anne refused. She held her ground, forcing Henry to either walk away or make her his queen. Henry chose the second path. He tried to end his marriage to Catherine, but the Catholic Church refused to grant the annulment. Henry answered by breaking with Rome and placing the English Church under royal control. England separated from the authority of the Pope, changing religion and politics across the country. Anne married Henry in 1533 and became queen. She was soon pregnant, and the entire kingdom waited. If the baby was a boy, Anne would secure her place forever, and Henry would finally have the heir he believed England needed. But the baby born that year was a girl named Elizabeth. The disappointment around the court was immediate. Henry tried to hide it, but everyone knew what the king wanted. Anne needed to try again. Her situation carried enormous pressure. Henry had risked international conflict and religious upheaval, and all of it rested on the promise of a male heir. Anne conceived again quickly after Elizabeth's birth, giving her body no time to recover. In July 1534, she suffered a miscarriage. The loss did not destroy her position immediately, but doubt crept into Henry's mind. She still had one chance to repair the situation, and another pregnancy followed. By early 1536, the court waited again for news. Then 2 events shook the palace. Catherine of Aragon died in January 1536. Soon after, Henry took part in a dangerous jousting match and suffered a fall from his horse. The accident shocked everyone, and Anne later said the news frightened her deeply. Not long after hearing about it, she lost the pregnancy. The baby had been a boy, about 15 weeks along. The loss crushed Henry's hopes. He began to believe the marriage itself was cursed. He had already believed his first marriage was cursed because Catherine had been his brother's widow. Now, the pattern looked familiar. He saw a marriage that failed to produce sons and might break God's law. Once those ideas settled into his mind, Anne's position became fragile. Inside the court, powerful figures were already shifting their loyalty. Jane Seymour had caught the king's attention. Thomas Cromwell, a key advisor who managed many royal policies, saw an opportunity. Cromwell and Anne had clashed over money taken from dissolved monasteries, creating dangerous enemies around the Queen. Once Anne lost the pregnancy, Henry no longer needed to protect her. The plan that followed moved with frightening speed. Anne was suddenly arrested. The court accused her of committing adultery with 5 men, including her own brother, George Boleyn. The accusations shocked the country. One of the accused men, a court musician named Mark Smeaton, gave a confession under pressure. No credible witnesses supported the story, yet the charges moved forward. The trial ignored normal procedures, and the evidence remained weak. The outcome had already been decided. Anne was found guilty. Modern historians widely agree. The accusations were fabricated, serving only as a formal step toward a decision already made. Anne Boleyn was not executed because she betrayed the king. She died because she failed to give him a son. Days before the execution, Henry had their marriage annulled. The decision erased Anne's status as queen and declared their daughter Elizabeth illegitimate. On May 19, 1536, Anne walked toward the scaffold. The king's guards stood nearby, and the executioner waited with his sword. Within weeks, she had gone from crowned queen to condemned prisoner. She was buried in the Tower of London in an unmarked grave with no monument. Henry did not stop with the execution. He moved to remove Anne's presence from the Tudor court. Portraits connected to her disappeared, and badges linked to her name were damaged or removed. Her monograms, carrying the letters A.O. for Henry and Anne, were chipped away from palace walls. Courtiers destroyed portraits on their own to avoid suspicion of treason. Elizabeth was only a toddler when her life changed instantly. At 3 years old, she lost her title and her place in the royal family. She became Lady Elizabeth, a child of the king who suddenly stood outside the royal line. The campaign against Anne did not stop with legal papers. Writers and courtiers described Anne as immoral and dangerous to justify the king's actions and protect his new marriage. By destroying Anne's reputation, the court made it easier to push Elizabeth aside in favor of the king's next heirs. Elizabeth grew up in a world where her mother's name was both famous and forbidden. She learned the truth privately, but avoided the subject publicly. Questioning the official story meant questioning the king's judgment, and Henry still controlled everything. Elizabeth survived by staying careful. She became part of another household, eventually guided by Catherine Parr, Henry's final wife. Under Parr's watch, Elizabeth received a careful education. She studied languages, history, and philosophy. The same sharp mind that once made Anne Boleyn stand out now shaped her daughter's education. But education alone could not protect her from politics. After Henry died in 1547, his son Edward VI became king. Elizabeth lived carefully during his reign, knowing royal relatives could become tools in political struggles. When Edward died in 1553, the crown passed to Elizabeth's older half-sister Mary. Mary ruled for 5 years and tried to restore the country fully to Catholic rule. She married Philip II of Spain, alarming many English nobles. Some rebels believed Elizabeth should replace Mary, turning her into a possible threat. Mary responded with imprisonment. Elizabeth spent time locked in the Tower of London, a place where many prisoners never left alive. Yet she survived again by staying cautious and avoiding open rebellion. She saw how quickly a queen could fall and how a king could remove a person from memory itself. Those lessons shaped her. When Mary died without surviving children in 1558, the line of succession turned back to Elizabeth. The woman once called illegitimate now ruled England. She stood before her council and spoke with calm authority to men who had once watched her mother fall. Now they listened while she shaped the future with careful words and sharp logic. When Elizabeth stepped into public life, people immediately noticed her bright red hair. The color looked exactly like her father's auburn red hair from his youth. It was a Tudor trait recognized across England. In a court where legitimacy mattered deeply, that visible connection to Henry VIII had power. Elizabeth wore it like armor. She displayed her red hair proudly in portraits to tie her image directly to the Tudor dynasty. But the hair was only half the inheritance. The sharper weapon came from her mother's mind. People who met Elizabeth face to face were struck by her dark, alert, and expressive eyes. Those eyes reminded people of Anne Boleyn. Elizabeth inherited the same long oval face, high cheekbones, and pointed chin. She also inherited Anne's intellectual sharpness. Elizabeth navigated religious conflicts and rival factions with careful policy and timing. Her approach differed from her father's blunt style. Henry ruled through strong commands and dramatic decisions, while Elizabeth preferred patience and calculation. She listened to advisors, delayed action when needed, and allowed rivals to reveal themselves before responding. That style mirrored the survival instincts seen in the Boleyn family. Elizabeth answered questions with clever words that revealed little, avoiding unnecessary conflict. She built loyalty through conversation, using the same qualities once praised in Anne Boleyn. One parent gave her the throne, and the other gave her the tools to keep it. As queen, Elizabeth faced a kingdom full of problems. Many advisors expected her to marry quickly to strengthen alliances and secure the dynasty with a royal child. Suitors appeared throughout her reign, including Robert Dudley and the French Duke of Anjou. Elizabeth encouraged negotiations and allowed discussions to continue for years. Then she refused. She understood that marriage could bring danger. Foreign husbands could pull England into unwanted conflicts, and a powerful spouse might overshadow the queen herself. Children created another problem, as multiple heirs could fuel civil wars. She never married. This choice challenged the expectations of her time, but gave her unusual freedom in politics. While Elizabeth managed her kingdom, a battle over her mother's reputation continued. Decades after Anne's death, an exiled Catholic priest named Nicholas Sander published a book attacking the English Reformation. He had never met Anne Boleyn and was born after her death, yet he claimed Anne had physical deformities, including a sixth finger on her right hand and a strange mole on her neck that he called a devil's mark. At that time, unusual physical traits were often linked to witchcraft and described as proof of a pact with Satan. Sander used those ideas to paint Anne as a sorceress who had bewitched Henry VIII. If Anne had manipulated the king through dark forces, her daughter Elizabeth would appear illegitimate. The rumors spread easily, but no contemporary record from the trial mentions a sixth finger or strange marks on her neck. Portraits painted during her lifetime show normal hands. The claims appeared only long after her death to attack the legacy of her family. The goal was clear: portray Anne as immoral, dangerous, and unnatural to weaken the image of Elizabeth. The strategy worked so well that even today, many people repeat the tale of the sixth finger as if it were historical fact. But Anne's execution had nothing to do with witchcraft. She died because she stood between the king and another chance for a son. Her enemies knew that if they could not defeat her while she lived, they could still rewrite her story after she was gone. Elizabeth never tried to publicly rebuild her mother's reputation. Bringing Anne back into political discussion could create controversy and question Elizabeth's own legitimacy. Instead, she built her public image around her father, using his authority to strengthen her own position. During her 45-year reign, she mentioned Anne Boleyn publicly only twice. But silence in public did not mean forgetting in private. She collected items linked to her mother, including objects connected to the famous Whitehall mural. Anne's falcon badge survived in Elizabeth's circle. She also showed favor toward relatives from the Boleyn line, maintaining a close connection with her niece Catherine Carey. These choices allowed Elizabeth to honor her mother's memory without turning it into public controversy. The greatest threat to Elizabeth's rule arrived in 1588 when Spain sent the Armada. The massive fleet sailed toward England intending to invade and restore Catholic rule by force. Many expected a queen to hide behind walls, but Elizabeth rode out to meet the army at Tilbury herself. She wore armor over a white dress, letting the troops see their queen in person. The woman who had once been declared illegitimate now stood at the center of England's resistance. The Armada failed when storms and English forces scattered the fleet. The victory strengthened Elizabeth's reputation and national identity. Painted after the defeat of Spain, the Armada portrait shows Elizabeth surrounded by symbols of power and victory, with her hand resting near a globe. Henry VIII tried to erase Anne Boleyn from history, destroying her portraits and dismantling her household. He wanted a son to secure his dynasty, but history gave him something else. The child he dismissed as a disappointment reshaped England more than any son he produced. Elizabeth ruled longer than any Tudor monarch before her, steering the country through a period of stability often described as a golden age. Her image spread everywhere, and she became one of the most painted rulers in European history. The mother's face nearly vanished, while the daughter's face became one of the most recognized images in English history. The attempt to erase Anne Boleyn began to look impossible because her daughter ruled so successfully. Elizabeth built a political life around restraint, living with the dangerous lessons forced upon her as a child. She kept the connection to her mother private, allowing the resemblance to exist quietly in her dark, observant, and focused eyes. The same eyes that had once captivated the court when Anne Boleyn entered the palace now belonged to a queen the kingdom had tried to erase. Anyone who looked closely at Elizabeth's face could see the connection staring back at them. And every day, the tiny portraits in the checkers ring faced each other beneath the gold. Mother and daughter, separated by history, joined by a secret worn on the queen's hand until the end of her life. The woman executed for failing to produce a male heir became the mother of England's most famous queen.